So welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much. I think most of you responded to the questionnaire. My colleague and I will analyze your responses, and then we will prepare answers to your questions in the afternoon session. Now, before I continue, I must apologize that I did not properly introduce myself. My name, as you already know, is Kumar. I come with a substantial number of years of ADB experience. I was in the Asian Development Bank for 28 years, working out of Manila and also in India and Bangladesh resident missions. I have experience in project preparation, project implementation, as well as in country programming. So in a sense, I have experience of the entire project cycle, so to speak. During this next 3 days, I will be assisted by my colleague, whom you've already met, Ratanak Lim. He's a project implementation specialist, and his expertise is in monitoring and evaluation. So I hope between the two of us, we will be able to provide you with a good learning experience. Now, let's think about why we are here and what we want to take away from this 3-day virtual training. The project SOP on project management is all about the project cycle. Now, every project cycle, in a sense, is the same. You start and you end. You start with the identification of project and you end with the completion and evaluation. But different countries, different agencies have different project cycles in the sense that between the start and the end, they have different stages. So every country or every institution, in a sense, will have its own project cycle. The start and the end is the same, identification and completion and evaluation. But between the start and the end, there will be different stages or phases. So for the purposes of the SOP, project management, we have a standard project cycle. And the SOP manual has been written in accordance with that standard project cycle. So we have 8 chapters in the SOP manual. And over the next 3 days, we will cover each of the 8 chapters. So for day 1, we will cover the first 3 chapters. Day 2, chapters 4, 5, and 6. And day 3, we will cover chapters 7 and 8. Now, coming back to the project cycle and the SOP project management. The SOP project management gives us the policy requirements and the procedures for each of the stages of the project cycle. We will show you the project cycle later. Maybe I can show it to you now. So this, what you see in the screen before you, is the project cycle that we will use or has been used for the SOP project management manual. So it has 5 stages. Stage 1 is the project identification. Stage 2, project preparation and appraisal. Stage 3 is the development partner, Royal Government of Cambodia due diligence and approval of financing. Stage 4 is the implementation and monitoring. And stage 5 is project evaluation, project completion and evaluation. So in this project cycle, there are 5 stages. So in the SOP manual, for each of these 5 stages, you will have the policy requirements, you will have the procedures, you will have the documents that need to be provided, and you will have the role and responsibilities of the stakeholders, meaning the government agencies and the development partner. So in other words, this SOP manual will tell you what needs to be done, when, who has to do it, and when it has to be done. So what, who, and when. But this SOP manual will not always tell you how to do it, because the how to do it is a very detailed technical subject. So for 3 technical subjects, procurement, financial management, and land acquisition and resettlement, we have separate SOP manuals. We, meaning the Royal Government of Cambodia, has separate SOP manuals for procurement, financial management, and resettlement. So if you want to know more about how to prepare bid documents, for example, how to do the evaluation, then you have to go to the SOP manual on procurement. If you are a financial person and you want to know how to prepare project accounts, how to have proper auditing procedures in place, and so on, then you will have to go to the SOP on financial management. And if you are a social safeguards person and you want to know how to prepare resettlement plans, how to do the monitoring of resettlement implementation, and so on, how to arrive at the appropriate compensation for affected persons, you will then have to go to the SOP on resettlement. Okay, the SOP on project management is broader. It covers the entire project cycle. It will tell you what needs to be done, who needs to do it, and when it is to be done. So that's clear, I hope. So what you will get out of this 3 days of training will be the different stages of the project cycle as defined in the SOP manual, SOP project management manual, the tasks to be carried out under each of the stages of the project cycle, the guidelines, policies, and procedures for each of the stages. These are the policies and guidelines of the government as well as the development partners. And 4 will be the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders. So let's start with the training proper. The first chapter in the SOP manual is the introduction chapter. Now, I think we mentioned earlier that if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to interrupt, but you have to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, the controller will allow you to speak, and then you can ask your questions. So do not wait. Please raise your hands when you have a question, and we will allow you to ask a question. I do not mind being interrupted, so please feel free to interrupt me as and when you have a question. So the introduction chapter has 5 sections. We will talk about the purpose, the background, the update, the source, the application, and the users. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of the SOP, project management, is to provide guidance for the identification, preparation, appraisal, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of public investment projects. So for each of the stage in the project cycle, there will be guidance provided for users. And the reason we do this is if you follow the SOP project management manual in preparing projects, in implementing projects, you will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of Cambodia's portfolio of externally assisted projects. The SOP manual, SOP project management manual, also sets out the institutional roles and responsibilities and accountabilities of each of the stakeholders, meaning the MEF, the Ministry of the line ministries, the exacting agencies implementing the projects, the development partners, and so on. And by following the SOP project management, if you follow it closely, the project, it will ensure that the projects will comply with the policies and procedures of RGC and the development partner. Any questions? Please raise your hand. Now the background for the SOP. The SOP started way back in 2005. In 2005, the government decided that they needed some procedures, some standards for managing externally financed projects. So in 2005, there was a MEF Prakas that initially set up the standard procedures for implementing all externally financed projects. In 2007, this Prakas was then converted into a sub-decree. And in 2012, the sub-decree was updated. That means in 2012, we had an updated SOP manual. Now so in 2012, there was an update to the SOP. And at the time, we had three manuals. In 2012, we had three manuals. The SOP manual, the procurement manual, and the financial management manual. In 2019, which is 5 years after the 2012 update, we had a second update. And at that time, we decided, or the government decided to rename the SOP manual to the SOP project management manual. So we now have three manuals, but they had different names. The SOP project management, the SOP procurement, and the SOP financial management. So in other words, the SOP manual became known as the SOP project management manual. All right? So that may confuse some people. Because when you think about project management, many of you, I'm sure, thought you're going to be having a training in project implementation, right? Because many of us think that project management means project implementation, which is not wrong. But in this context, when we talk about project management, we are talking about the entire project cycle. Okay, so yes, we will cover implementation, but we will also cover other aspects of the project cycle, meaning from project identification all the way through the different stages up to project evaluation. So it's not just project implementation. Now, where do we get the manual? Contains the SOP project management manual contains many guidelines, procedures, roles, and responsibilities. So we have put this all together in one manual, and the source for these guidelines, procedures, and roles and responsibilities comes from various places. Okay, one is the Royal Government of Cambodia's rules and regulations, sub-decrees, and prakas. Two, we also got some information and data from the public investment management reform strategy. I will talk a bit more about that later. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there's an SOP on procurement. There's an SOP on project financial management. There's an SOP on land acquisition and resettlement. And then we have the DP policies and procedures. And lastly, we have international best practice. So we have sourced the information from all of these different documents to arrive at the SOP project management. So this is the project cycle, and this is the project cycle that you will see in the SOP manual. And this is what we will use for our training over the next 3 days. This project cycle is only for externally funded projects. Okay, so we start with project identification, then we move to project preparation and appraisal, then the due diligence and approval of financing, project implementation and monitoring, and finally, project completion and evaluation. Now, how do we use this SOP manual? Firstly, public investment projects, all public investment projects that are funded by externally financed DPs must use this manual. So public investment projects, including deconcentrated projects. The SOP manual, SOP PM, does not cover decentralized projects and PPP projects, public-private partnership projects. For decentralized projects and for PPP projects, we will have, the government has a separate set of instructions or guidelines, which will be a different manual. Okay. Now, what happens when the DP policy requirement is not covered by the SOP project management manual? Sometimes there will be gaps. When you write the SOP project management manual, you cannot include every single development partner policy requirement. It will not be possible. You try to cover most of it. You try to cover most of the bilaterals, ADB, World Bank. You try to cover some of the more the bilaterals who are more active in Cambodia, for example, JICA. So you try to cover their policy requirements in the SOP manual, but you cannot be expected to cover every single policy requirement. And also, don't forget, the development partners are changing their policy requirements over time. Every 3 years, every 5 years, they refine their policy requirements or they change their policy requirements, right? The SOP manual is not updated every year. It's updated once every 5 years or so. So there will be instances where there will be a gap between the DP policy requirement and the SOP manual. How do you deal with that? Anybody? How do you deal with a situation where you have a gap in what the DP is requiring as a policy requirement and what is provided for in the SOP project management manual? Well, this gap, as we call it, has to be identified early. This has to be identified when we are preparing the project. For those of you who are involved in project preparation, one of the things you have to look out for is any gaps or any differences in the DP policy requirement and what is provided in the SOP manual. If there is a gap, then this will have to be included in the DP financing agreement. Okay. So and what happens when there is a conflict between the DP policy requirement and what is in the financing agreement. Well, what is in the DP financing agreement shall prevail. So if you look at the third point, the third column here is about early identification of gaps in policy requirements and what is in the SOP manual. So what we have to do is we have to identify these gaps early in the project cycle during the project preparation stage. And any gaps have to be addressed in the DP financing agreement. Now, suppose we did not identify these gaps during project preparation, or suppose there are some changes to the DP's policy requirements during implementation, right? So there will be a difference between what is in the SOP manual and what is the DP policy requirement. How do we address that? That is column number 4. The DP financing agreement will prevail. Is everybody clear on that? So the first step is identify gaps early during project preparation. But if we do not do that, and if during implementation we find out that what the DP is requiring is different from what the SOP manual is doing, what happens? We go to the financing agreement, because that is the ultimate document. The financing agreement is the agreement. Everything in that financing agreement has to be followed. Okay? So you now see the importance of the financing agreement and what goes into that financing agreement. Is that understood? Who uses the SOP manual, SOP PM manual? Well, it's prepared primarily for RGC staff involved in development projects. The development partners will use it as well, and increasingly many of the bilaterals. Initially, it was only used by World Bank, ADB, and JICA. But recently, the recent experience is that many of the bilaterals, like India and Korea and AFD, which is the French bilateral agency, they have all started using the SOP manual to prepare their projects and to implement their projects. Consultants will use it, development practitioners, NGOs, and civil society. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the SOP will have to be updated from time to time. In the case of Cambodia, we updated it in 2012 and again in 2019. That is 5 years. So we don't expect another update until 2024, right? Excuse me. The General Department of International Cooperation and Debt Management, GDIC, in MEF, is responsible for the guidance, clarification, and interpretation of the SOPPM. Right? So if there's any issue in the project manual, in the project management manual, then GDIC in MEF will provide the guidance and clarification. I hope they don't have to, because I hope the SOP manual is clear so that everybody understands what needs to be done. But just in case there's some confusion or there's some matter that requires clarification or interpretation, then GDIC is responsible for giving that clarification or interpretation. Okay. And as I mentioned before, every time we do an update of the SOP manual, We will take into account lessons learned. We will take into account the updated policies of the development partners and government and so on. I just also want to let you know that when I mentioned my experience before, I would also like to let you know that I was involved in the update of the SOP in 2018 and 19. ADB recruited me as a consultant to help with the update of the SOP, Project Management Manual, in 2019. We're in chapter 2 now. Chapter 2 is an interesting chapter because it answers a lot of your questions about who, the who answer, who does what, when, the roles and responsibilities of key ministries and agencies. Now, in this slide presentation, I'm not going to cover very much because I've decided that the best way to cover this subject is to do it at the end of each chapter. So the end of each chapter, from chapter 3 to chapter 8, at the end of each chapter, we will look at the roles and responsibilities of the key players, right? So for this chapter, I will not say very much for now, but from chapter 3 to chapter 8, as we complete each stage of the project cycle, we will go through to see what the role and responsibilities of each of the ministries of stakeholders are for that particular stage of the project cycle. Okay, so for now we will leave it as it is, just to say that the key players are the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and in the Ministry of Economy and Finance there are primarily 3 divisions or 3 departments: GDIC DM, that is the International Cooperation and Debt Management, the budget department, and the resettlement department. And then you have the line ministries who are responsible for the implementation of the project. Of course, you have the development partners, NGOs and civil society. And you have the others like the Ministry of Planning, the CDC, which is the MOE. MOE is the Ministry of Environment. Let me get CDC correct. CDC will be the Council for the Development of Cambodia. That's CDC. So let's move to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is project identification. So the project cycle starts with project identification. Now, a lot of you, as I mentioned earlier, probably only involved in project implementation. So you already have a project, you are appointed as director of PMU, and you're told by your minister that this is your project, please implement. So you're given a PMU staff and you're given a project and you have to implement it. But how did that project get there? How was it prepared? How was it identified? That is what we are going to cover under chapter 3. How are projects identified for financing by external sources, that is development partners. And we will look at 6 sections. We will look at something called the project environment, project alignment. We'll look at the government's rectangular strategy phase 4. We'll look at the development partners country strategy. And we will briefly look at the public investment program, the public investment management reform strategy, and the appointment of the EA and IA. This is the project cycle, and we are in number 1 now, project identification. Alignment. Now, when you identify a project for financing, for external financing in Cambodia, it has to be aligned with 3 strategies. Aligned meaning it has to comply with, it has to meet 3 different strategies. And what are they? The first one is the RGC, the Royal Government of Cambodia's Rectangular Strategy Phase 4, and the National Strategic Development Plan. So this one in dark blue that you see on the left is the government's strategy, right? Well, you all know this very well. It's called the rectangular strategy. We are in phase 4 at the moment. That's the first thing. But the project also has to be part of the line ministry's sector master plan. Okay, so every line ministry, whether it's the Ministry of Transport or the Power Ministry or the Ministry of Agriculture, they will all have their own sector master plans. It's usually a 5-year plan. So the projects has also to be part of the ministry's 5-year plan. And thirdly, the project has to be part or fit in with, or what we call aligned with, the development partners strategy for Cambodia. So every development partner, World Bank, ADB, JICA, Korea, all development partners will have a strategy for Cambodia. And each of the strategies may be different. So when a project is identified for financing by a development partner, it has to fit in with all three. If the project fits in with the development partner strategy, but is not part of the line ministry sector plan, can we include that for financing? No. How can we have a project funded by ADB that is not part of the ministry's sector plan? Or how can we have a project funded by the World Bank, which is not meeting the goals of the rectangular strategy? So any project that is identified for financing must meet all three strategies, or must be part of all three strategies or development plans. Okay? So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Rectangular strategy phase 4, I think you know it better than me. There are 4 strategic goals: create more jobs, sustainable economic growth around 7% each year, achieve poverty reduction target below 10%, and strengthen the capacity and governance of public institutions. So that is the rectangular strategy. But this is the same thing. There are 4 priority areas: human resource development, economic diversification, promote private sector development, and inclusive sustainable development. Now we come to the development partners strategy. Now, development partner strategy is usually referred to as the country partnership strategy or framework. Okay. ADB calls it the country partnership strategy. World Bank calls it the country partnership framework. Maybe Japan calls it something else. So every country, every development partner, especially the multilaterals, UN, IFAD, IFAD, World Bank, ADB, will have a development strategy or framework for Cambodia. Okay. Now, what is that development and what is that country partnership strategy and how is it prepared? Firstly, there's something called diagnostic work. Okay, so the development partner every 5 years or sometimes every 3 years will do a lot of background studies. The background studies are the economic and sector studies, the thematic assessments covering governance, poverty reduction, poverty, environment, private sector development, and so on, right? Once they have put together all this diagnostic work, this will feed into something called the country partnership strategy. Okay. The country partnership strategy then becomes the relationship document between the government, between Cambodia and the development partner. So that country partnership strategy or framework that's prepared once every 3 years or sometimes mostly once every 5 years becomes the guiding document that sets the framework for the partnership between the development partner and Cambodia. And that framework or strategy is used to select projects for financing, right? So it's the strategic and operational framework for the development partners involved in Cambodia, involvement in Cambodia. So the development partner strategy should also be aligned to the government's rectangular strategy, because it will be useless for the development partner to have a strategy that is not aligned or not compatible with the government's rectangular strategy. So the first thing ADB or World Bank or JICA or whoever has to make sure when they do a strategy for Cambodia is to make sure that their strategy is also compatible or aligned with the rectangular strategy. Secondly, it will be prepared in consultation with MEF and the line ministries. It will be used. It will be usually for a 1 to 5 year period. Some development partners, especially the bilaterals, will do it year by year. Every year they will do a different strategy. Most development partners will do 3 to 5 year strategy. ADB and the World Bank does 5-year strategies. Okay. And this strategy is supported by what we call a business plan, right? The business plan is what contains the projects, the lending products and the technical assistance products. The lending and technical assistance that will be given to Cambodia over the next 5-year period. Okay. So the strategy is supported by a business plan. And the business plan contains the list of projects. Okay. So everybody clear on the development partner country partnership strategy? We have an example of that. We have 2 examples of that, or 3, sorry. We have the ADB, World Bank, and JICA. This is in your link documents in your folder, or you can just look at the screen before you. This is the ADB country partnership strategy for Cambodia. Covers the period 2019 to 2023. It's a fairly long document. It's a fairly long document. It covers subjects like the strategic framework. You will see that it is aligned, it takes into account lessons from the previous strategy. It's aligned to the NSDP, which is the government strategy. It talks about how the role of other development partners. And then it comes to ADB strategic objectives and priorities. And then it goes on to give so a lot of economic information, data on the key constraints, key development challenges in the economy, right? So, and then it talks about ADB strategic objectives and priorities, and then the strategy and the sectors that ADB is going to be involved in over the next 5 years. So this is the country partnership strategy and the framework for Cambodia for 2019 to 2023. It's 4 years, right? Yeah, so it's 4 years, not 5 years. Sorry, 5 years. So let's look at the framework. This is the framework, because everything in this strategy paper is captured in this framework. Okay, so you'll see at the heading at the top of this framework, what is there at the top of this framework? Rectangular strategy phase 4. So the DP's country partnership strategy or framework is aligned to or is guided by the country's development strategy. Okay, meaning Cambodia's development strategy. And Cambodia's government's development strategy is in the rectangular strategy phase 4. So if you look at this framework, you will see at the top of this framework is the rectangular strategy phase 4. So everything comes from that. Okay. So the rectangular strategy, as we saw earlier, has 4 pillars. What is called the socio-economic agenda. Economic diversification, human resource development, sustainable and inclusive development, and acceleration of governance reforms. So ADB has, under those 4 pillars or agendas, developed its own strategy or own objectives. Okay, and those objectives are listed here in these 4 columns. Under number 1 is to accelerate competitiveness and economic diversification. Number two, strengthen human capital and lifelong learning. Number 3, foster green, inclusive, and sustainable development. Number 4, improve governance. So these are the 4 pillars of ADB strategy. And you will see that the 4 pillars of ADB strategy is aligned to or fits in with the 4 pillars of RGC's rectangular strategy, phase 4. Okay. There are some questions. Somebody, one of the participants asked me whether it referred to the IFAD's country strategy opportunity program. Yes, the IFAD, like I said, every development partner will have a strategy, but they will have different names for it. Okay, so the ADB calls it country partnership strategy. The World Bank calls it country partnership framework. And I understand IFAD calls it country strategic opportunity program. Okay, so JICA may call it something else. So let me show you JICA now. It's JICA, yes. Here's JICA. It's a little bit old. I couldn't get the most recent one, but this is 2015 and 16. This is JICA's outline of cooperation. They call it outline of cooperation in Cambodia. Okay, so if you look at it, it's more attractive. The presentation is very nice and very easy to read, but they have the same information. If you look beyond the presentation, the information is going to be same, because they will also be talking about the rectangular strategy, and they will be talking about the JICA strategy, right? The JICA strategy for Cambodia is integrated assistance, seamless assistance, promoting development partnerships, enhancing research and knowledge sharing. So this is JICA's. JICA is another document, development partnership, development cooperation. This is more recent, 2017. Development cooperation policy for Cambodia. Okay, this is the most simple document, but you will see it has the priority areas: industrial development, industrial development, better quality of life, realizing a sustainable society, additional points to be taken into account. So this is JICA's document for 2017. Simple, just 2 pages. So every development partner will have one. World Bank and ADB do it quite elaborately because they have a lot of diagnostic studies, and then they set the setting, the framework. The framework will be based on the development challenges faced by the country. So they will identify the development challenges. Then they will set out their strategy. And then they will set out their business plan, which will be the projects and technical assistance that they're going to finance over the framework period. So every development partner will have one. The information will be the same. The presentation will be different. Some development partners keep it simple, maybe 2 pages. ADB and the World Bank, a bit more complex, big documents. But information is the same. Strategy for the country, strategy that is aligned to the country's development goals, which is the rectangular strategy phase 4. Is that clear? I can even show you the World Bank document. Yeah, here's the World Bank. World Bank country partnership framework for Cambodia, approved on 1st May 2019. It covers the period 2019 to 2023. Again, it's a very long document setting out the development challenges and then setting out the World Bank's strategy for Cambodia. Okay. The 2 important so here, this is World Bank's what they call the country partnership framework, focus areas and objectives. After all that several pages of presentation of issues and challenges and so on, the areas that they will be focusing on is captured in this framework. Okay, so they have 3 focus areas: promote state efficiency and boost private sector development. Focus area number 2, foster human development. Focus area number 3, improve agriculture and strengthen sustainable use of natural resources. So this is the World Bank's 3 focus areas as set out in their country partnership framework for the period 2019 to 2023. Okay. And there's one other thing I want to show you, and that is in another table further down. If you have time, you can read through this document. You will learn a lot. This will be of more interest to you, because at the end of the day, when you look at a country partnership strategy, you know, okay, very good. This is a strategy for Cambodia. This strategy is aligned to the government's overall vision and goal as set out in the rectangular strategy. But what is more important is how much money are they going to be making available for Cambodia and which projects are they going to finance? Okay. Many DPs in their strategy will not give you that information. The World Bank gives you limited information, and this is the information provided by the World Bank. in their country strategy framework. So IDA 18 program for each of the focal areas, these are the projects that they have identified. Financial year 2019, 3 projects: water supply, 55 million; Cambodia nutrition project, 15 million; agriculture sector diversification project, 91.67 million; and sustainable landscape and ecotourism, 50.66 million. So in financial year 19, they have identified 4 projects in 3 focus areas, right? And to 2020, 2 projects in 2 focus areas. And then they also tell you that in 2021 to 2023, they will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects, but they have not identified the amounts. So it's just the name of the project. Digital economy and competitiveness, road connectivity, education sector, health sector, natural resource management, urban development. So those are the projects that the World Bank is going to finance between 2021 and 2023. So when you look at this World Bank framework document, you just need to look at 2 tables. This table and the table I showed you earlier. This table. What are the areas in which the World Bank is going to be involved in? And what are the projects they're going to finance? Okay. Now let's see what the World ADB gives you. We already saw the ADB. Let's look at the ADB business plan. ADB gives you a lot more details on the project. This is the ADB business plan. Okay. ADB country operations business plan for the year 2020 to 2022. So 3 years. So every year, ADB will update this business plan, and every year it will be a 3-year rolling program. So you have the country partnership strategy, and this country partnership strategy is supported or supports a business plan which contains the projects that ADB is going to finance in Cambodia over the next 3 years. And this business plan is updated every year because it's a 3-year rolling plan. So ADB gives a lot more information. This business plan and the country partnership strategy are public documents. You can go to the ADB website, ADB Cambodia website, and you can download this information. Okay, these are public documents, not secret. But before they publish this document or make it public, they have already discussed with the government, with all the line ministries, and they have discussed with MEF and agreed. So then it becomes a public document. World Bank does not share so much information in advance. They share only confirmed information. Information in year 2, 3, 4, 5, they don't share so much information. But ADB shares information for 3 years at a time. Very detailed information. We can have a look at it now. Look at this. Lending products, indicative assistance pipeline. Lending products for 2020 to 2022, 3 years. So here you have the name of the project, okay, 2020 national firm, strengthening financial management, grid reinforcement, second decentralized, and so on, right? And you have the amount, which fund is it coming from, and so on. How much the government is putting in, and if there's any co-financing. So this table is there for 3 years, right? Up to 2022. 3 years. And then we also have what we call the non-lending products. What are these non-lending products? These are technical assistance, right? TA, technical assistance for capacity building, for preparing projects, for knowledge, and so on. So ADB will also list the technical assistance projects that it has for the next 3 years, 2020 to 2022. So here you can see all the TA projects for 2020, 2021, and 2022. The area, the sector, the division in ADB, which is not so interesting for you. They don't have the EA, but they have the sector. You know which sector it is. Because this is an ADB document, so they will not give the name of the EA. So the conclusion, the wrap up is this: every development partner will have a strategy for Cambodia. Some development partners will do it for 1 year at a time. Some do it for 3 years. Some do it for 5 years. Some development partners will have a very simple strategy, just 1 page, with no other information. ADB and World Bank have quite an elaborate strategy because they do a lot of background studies before they develop the strategy. They identify the constraints in the economy, the weaknesses, the bottlenecks, and they try to address these bottlenecks or these constraints in their strategy. So that's the development partner strategy. Now, what is the process within government to identify projects? We know we have the rectangular strategy. We know we have the development partner strategy. But how are projects, what is the process of identifying projects? This process at the moment is called the government. This is the government of Cambodia's process. It's called the Public Investment Program. Okay, called the PIP, PIP. Some of you may have experience with this. It is a mechanism for identifying and listing projects for development partner financing. Okay. It's a 3-year rolling program approved in tandem with the budget cycle. The Ministry of Planning consolidates and prioritizes projects in consultation with the Line Ministry and MEF. And these projects are also part of the Line Ministry's 5-year sector plan, consistent with the rectangular strategy. So you see now, in the PIP, Public Investment Program, the projects that are included in the Public Investment Program have to be from the ministries, the Line Ministry's 5-year sector plan. And the 5-year sector plan has to be consistent with the rectangular strategy. So you see the connection now. You see the connection. And I will show you the connection by looking at this. This is the project identification flow chart. Okay. Project identification flow chart. So there are 4 main players here: development partner, MEF, Line Ministry, and Ministry of Planning. Okay. So the first thing that happens is the Line Ministry will submit a list of priority projects consistent with the rectangular strategy and the sector master plan. So line ministries, as I mentioned before, have sector master plans, 5-year sector master plan, right? And this sector master plan should be consistent with the government's overall vision and goals as defined in the rectangular strategy. So every year, this list of projects will be submitted to MOP, Ministry of Planning. And Ministry of Planning's job is to ensure that the projects are consistent with the rectangular strategy and NSDP, and then they will prepare the PIP, the Public Investment Program. At the same time, they will also send this list of projects to MEF, who will review the list of projects. So you see this arrows going back and forth. So when the Ministry of Planning receives the list from the line ministry, they will make sure that they are consistent with the rectangular strategy, and they will prioritize this list. And when they prioritize this list to prepare the PIP, they will also consult with MEF. Once the PIP is finalized, it will be approved by the Council of Ministers, right? After it's approved by the Council of Ministers, it goes to the CDC, which is the Council for the Development of Cambodia. Will then use this list to get funding from the development partners. Okay. So in the meantime, the development partners are preparing their country partnership strategy, right? And their business plans. And in developing the country partnership strategy, they will discuss with GDIC. That is their main counterpart. When a development partner discusses the strategy, the country strategy for Cambodia, the main counterpart for the development partner is GDIC in MEF, right? So they will discuss with GDIC and agree on the strategy. The projects to support that strategy will be discussed with the EA, the line ministry. And that will feed into the strategy. See this line going down. Okay, then we will have a strategy and a business plan. You follow this flow chart. Any questions on this flow chart? This explains chapter 3, project identification. How are projects identified? As I mentioned, the projects are here in the business plan. How are they identified? First, the line ministry prepares a sector plan. Each year, projects are submitted to MOP, Ministry of Planning. The Ministry of Planning will then discuss with MEF and finalize this list. They will prioritize. You may submit 20 projects, but MOP says, no, we don't have space for 20 projects. We can only accept 5 projects. So they will prioritize your list. Your long list of 20 becomes a short list or confirmed list of 5. These 5 projects will then become part of the PIP, Public Investment Program. The Public Investment Program will then be presented to the development partners. And the development partners will then decide which projects from the PIP they will finance. And they will discuss this with the line ministry. And once they decide, they will include it in their business plan. Firstly in the strategy, and then in the business plan. Is this clear? This flow chart? If you understand this flow chart, then you will know project identification, the process by which projects are identified. projects are here in this business plan, right? But how do they get to this business plan? It starts with the line ministry's master plan. And it flows through the PIP, through MEF, and down to the strategy, and then to the business plan. Any questions? This flowchart is also available with you in the folder that we sent you. So everything that I put up on the screen today and over the next 2 days is available in your folder. Okay, let's look at this same flowchart. Sorry. Presented in a different way. Project identification, roles and responsibilities of ministries and agencies during the project cycle. So the flowchart is being presented in a different way, broken down into what each ministry or EA has to do during the project identification stage. So MEF has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 responsibilities under project identification. First, it will work with Ministry of Planning to ensure that the annual finance law has budget for the project. That's okay. It will assess the suitability of the project for appraisal using the PIMF project selection criteria. I will come to that later. General Department of Budget will agree on the project budget allocation for the project. DDIC DM is consulted by the DP when preparing the project country strategy. Will agree on the strategy, and GDIC will identify and appoint the EA in accordance with the mandate. EA, submit projects consistent with rectangular strategy and sector master plan. Discuss priority projects with the DP for inclusion in the DP country assistance plan. Confirm agreement with EA and conduct insurance. That's okay. I haven't covered that. And ministries. So, any questions on this? Or okay, I come back to this because this is a very important flow chart. If you understand the flow, then you will understand how projects are identified. And the earlier screen I showed you, will detail the responsibilities of each of the stakeholders during the project identification stage. So here we are talking about stage 1 of the project cycle only, right? We haven't gone to stage 2 yet. We are still at stage 1. Right? Stage 1, we are saying at stage 1, This is how the flow is. Who does what and when, and how projects that are initially identified by the line ministry, which are part of the sector plan, consistent with rectangular strategy, then becomes part of the PIP, Public Investment Program, controlled by Ministry of Planning, but in consultation with MEF. And then it's this, once it's part of the PIP, it is discussed with the DP and included in the strategy and business plan. So that's how projects go from EA Ministry sector plan to DP business plan. This is the flow. All right. Any questions? So let's get back to our slides. We're nearing 12, so you must be getting hungry. Now, let me talk a little bit about this. Some of you may have heard of this. It's called the Public Investment Management System Reform Strategy. Now, the government is thinking of consolidating its project management system with the budget system. I don't mean consolidating, I mean aligning the project management system with the budget system. And to do that, they've come up with something called the Public Investment Management System Reform Strategy, PIMS Reform Strategy. Some of you may know it as the PIM. In MEF, it's referred to as the PIM, Public Investment Management System. Okay. Now, this system will come into effect in 2024. This system will be for all projects in Cambodia. Those externally funded, government funded, and PPP. So national budget, externally funded, and PPP projects. Remember, I told you earlier that the SOPPM is only for externally funded projects. But in 2024, the government will have one system that will include all three types of projects: national budget, externally funded projects, and PPP projects. And that system is going to be called the Public Investment Management System. Okay? And the reason we have that system is to improve the efficiency of public investment management through improved coordination and better linkage between planning and execution. So now we have SOPPM for DP funded projects. From 2024, we will have only one system called the Public Investment Management System. And the SOPPM will be merged with this new system. Okay? But you don't have to worry about that now, because for the next 2 years, we will continue to use the SOP project management manual. In future, we will migrate to this new system, and all the procedures that are in the SOP PM manual will be incorporated into this new system. So the procedures will not be different. The requirements will not be different. But one thing will change, and that is the project cycle. I don't have the project cycle here. I will show it to you later. You have the project cycle? No, there. I will show you the project cycle later. it's not so important at the moment, but I can tell you that the project cycle is a bit different. The start and the end is the same, project identification and project completion and evaluation. But in between, there's some additional steps because there's a need to link with the budget system and so on. And because it applies to all types of projects, government budget, DP funded, and PPP, they have included some additional stages in the project cycle. Those stages may not apply to DP funded projects. So if we are talking about DP funded projects, we will still have pretty much the same project cycle. But there will be some additional steps for national budget projects and for PPP projects. Okay, let's go to appointment of executing agency. Factors to be considered. There are 4 factors to be considered. Mandate in line with royal decree or sub-decree, interest and commitment, administrative and managerial skills, ability to mobilize and commit required human resources. And in appointing the EA, these are the factors that will be considered. If the project has more than one line ministry, then one EA, one becomes the EA and the others will become the IA. There are some projects involve multi-sectors, integrated multi-sector projects. So there will be more than one line ministry involved. So then MEF, in consultation with the line ministries, will decide that one will become the EA and the other line ministries in that project will become the what we call the implementing agency. MEF can sometimes be the EA to provide overall management and coordination. For example, if you have an emergency restoration project, because of the nature of the project, it requires a lot of coordination between different agencies. You will have MEF as the coordinating agency and the EA. Then there's a question of having to do the assessment of the EA's capacity. So what aspects do we look at? We will be looking at the technical aspect, the financial aspect, and the administrative aspect in partnership with the DP. So any assessment of the EA that is carried out prior to the appointment of the EA as the executing agency of the project will be done in partnership with the DP. Once this assessment is done, the DP may develop an action plan to address any capacity issues or to take any corrective measures. And MEF will then, once it is satisfied that all these conditions have been met and that an assessment has been carried out, and if there are any weaknesses, the weaknesses are being addressed through an action plan. Once MEF is satisfied with it, it will confirm the designation of the EA in writing, right? And the line ministry will confirm acceptance of that designation. Okay? So this is the process for appointing executing agencies. Now, it has to be pointed out that this process is there, but in most cases, the EA will be predetermined, right? And why do we say that? In most cases. In some cases, it is open, and therefore we have to go through this process of making sure it's in line with the decree, making sure it has the mandate, making sure it has interest and commitment, making sure it has the administrative and managerial skills, and so on and so on. In most cases, we don't have to do that, because when we looked at the this flow chart here, we already see that the projects are coming from the line ministry's sector plan. It is coming through the process of the BIP, and it then is feeding into the business plan. So obviously, if that project has come from this line ministry's sector master plan, then that line ministry is going to be the EA, right? So in most cases, it will be predetermined. But in some cases, where a project comes outside of this system, it is proposed by a development partner, it is proposed by a bilateral agency, or proposed by the government of China, for example, to build a very complex project, a bridge, a very complex project. Then they will have to identify an EA for that project. Then we will go through this system. Of seeing whether it has a mandate, seeing interest and commitment, making sure it has administrative skills, and ability to mobilize resources. Also, when you have new EAs, some EAs have been receiving ADB or World Bank assistance over the last 20, 15 years. This project that they're doing is maybe the 6th or 8 or 10 projects they've done under ADB World Bank. So those EAs we know have the capacity. But there will be new sectors where the EA or where the DP is involved. So the EA will be new. In that case, it's very important that we carry out this assessment, right? This assessment of EA capacity, technical, financial, and administrative capability. And this assessment is usually done in conjunction or in partnership with the development partner. And once this assessment is completed, any weaknesses has to be addressed through a development plan. And when MEF is satisfied, MEF will then confirm the designation of the EA in writing, and the line ministry will accept the acceptance, will accept the appointment or designation. Is that clear? So we have covered chapters 1, 2, and 3 in relation to the project cycle. So we've looked at project identification. And in identifying projects, we have said 3 things mainly. The projects have to be aligned with the government of Cambodia's overall vision and goals as set out in the rectangular strategy. It has to be aligned with the development partners' strategy for Cambodia. And also it has to be part of the line ministry's sector master plan, right? These 3 things. Then the process of identifying the project, or the process of this project, identified projects feeding into the country business plan of the development partner, is set out in this flowchart that we looked at earlier. And we also looked at the roles and responsibilities as set out in this table, detailed roles and responsibilities for each of these ministries in the project identification stage. So we got to, it's nearly 12 o'clock now. Oh, it's just gone. So it's lunchtime. You take a break. I think according to the agenda, we break for 2 hours. We come back at 2. Please be on time. Now, during the break, we will sort out the questions that you had asked at the start of the session, and we will try and answer some of those questions. And also, if you have any other questions, you can ask those questions at the start of the afternoon session. In the afternoon, you will be doing most of the talking, because the afternoon session will be based on some exercises that we have. We will have a look at some actual documents and in more detail, and we will discuss some of the elements of those documents. And then at 3 o'clock, as you know, we will have a test to see to test your understanding of what was discussed today. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.